counsel Robert Mueller not to go too far in investigating his or his family's finances. Joining me now is Democratic Senator Chris Coons of Delaware. He serves on the Senate Judiciary Committee. Senator, White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders said today that President Trump has confidence in the Attorney General, otherwise he wouldn't be there. In your view, do you think President Trump was trying to send a message that Sessions should step down, should quit?
Well, I thought it was really striking that in an interview with the New York Times, a media outlet that the president has often criticized, that he chose to do two things that struck me as inappropriate. One, to brush back Special Counsel Bob Mueller by saying he better not go too far in looking into my finances, and the other suggesting that he wished he hadn't hired the Attorney General, and he wouldn't have if he'd known he would recuse himself. In both cases, Jake, I think the president is confusing what the role is of the Department of Justice. The officials who lead the Department of Justice take an oath to uphold the Constitution, not a loyalty oath to the president. And I think if the president mistakenly thinks the Department of Justice is merely a political extension of the White House, then he ought to have a good look at the Constitution and the importance of the independence of the investigatory and prosecutorial functions of the FBI, the DOJ, and in this case, Special Counsel Bob Mueller.
Do you interpret what President Trump said today about Sessions? We'll get to Mueller in a second. Do you think he was trying to suggest to him that he quit?
If I were in Jeff Sessions' shoes, if I were Attorney General, I think this was a suggestion I should quit. It is strikingly disloyal from someone who should be grateful that Senator Sessions was literally the first senator. Now Attorney General Sessions was the first senator, and in some ways the longest and most dogged defender of Donald Trump in the course of his campaign. So I think he both misunderstands why the Attorney General recused himself and shows a striking lack of loyalty to one of his strongest and earliest supporters.
There was an interesting moment in the interview where the president said it wasn't until Richard Nixon that the FBI began reporting to the Justice Department out of courtesy. He said, quote, "The FBI person really reports directly to the President of the United States, which is interesting, which is interesting. And I think we're going to have a great new FBI director," unquote. Your committee just unanimously approved Christopher Wray to be the next FBI director. It now goes to the Senate floor. Do you think President Trump is trying to send a message to him? You work for me, pal.
Well, President Trump sends all sorts of messages, some of them focused, some of them unfocused, some of them in long-form interviews, some of them in Twitter rants. Frankly, what matters here is what Christopher Wray understands about his job. And he comported himself well in front of the Judiciary Committee. The reason he got a unanimous vote was that he persuaded the members of the committee that he understands his obligation is to the Constitution, not loyalty to the president.
The White House is saying that President Trump was making it clear that Special Counsel Robert Mueller should not, quote, move outside of the scope of the investigation. In your view, do you think President Trump was threatening Special Counsel Mueller in any way? If you peek too much into my family's finances, I'm going to fire you?
Well, the language of the interview certainly was implicitly threatening and suggested that Bob Mueller should stick solely to things directly related to Russia. That's not the scope of the special counsel. He's looking into obstruction of justice, and he's looking into whether or not there was inappropriate collusion between Russian officials and the Trump campaign. But as he investigates, as this goes along, I would expect him to follow the facts where they lead and to reach whatever legal conclusions are appropriate. One of the things that makes Bob Mueller strong as a special counsel is that he's clearly got bipartisan support here in Congress. He is well respected as a career federal law enforcement officer, and I suspect he's not intimidated at all by these statements by the president in the New York Times interview.
Susan Collins, a senator from Maine, Republican, told me that if the president fires Mueller, it will be, quote, catastrophic. Another Republican senator told me that if he fires Mueller, he suggested that Congress would seek a way to continue the investigation beyond just the committees. What do you think would happen if President Trump fired Special Counsel Mueller? What do you think the Senate would do?
I think there would be very widespread rejection of that action as being a fundamental threat to the rule of law in our country, and I think strong action would be taken on a bipartisan basis by the Senate and the House. I think the president really underestimates the extent to which there is deep bipartisan concern about this ongoing Russia matter and real enthusiasm on both sides to see it resolved, to get to the bottom of it, and to understand whether there's a there and there needs to be some prosecutions and some further consequences, or whether there's nothing there and it's been fully investigated and it should be something we can move past. There's a real hunger on the part of many members of both parties to have this resolved appropriately. And if the president steps in and cuts it off by firing Bob Mueller, I think he will pay a very heavy price here in Congress.
Senator Chris Coons, Democrat from the small wonder state of Delaware. Thanks so much, sir. Good to see you.
Thank you, Jake.
A diagnosis of brain cancer is not stopping Senator John McCain from paying attention to what's going on in